Hello, and welcome to the ABCs of Horror podcast. I'm your host, one of two, Daniel Gidlow, joined by my partner, and more importantly, amazing horror movie enthusiast, Elizabeth Dixon.
Wow, you're talking me up hard. Hello.
ABCs of Horror. An education in horror entertainment. Begins now.
Well, you're the one who got me into horror movies way back in the day. Not that I wasn't into horror movies, but you got me into the real nitty-gritty.
The weird shit.
Yeah, the weird shit when we first met. You're partially responsible for the fact that this even exists.
What have I done?
And the fact that back nearly a decade ago, you and I started reviewing horror movies on and off throughout the years. And, I'd say we got some credentials.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure. I mean, self-appointed credentials for sure. And I've been reviewing movies on and off on the internet since the mid-2000s. So we're pretty much OGs at this point. So welcome to our horror-themed podcast. We'll be going through the whole library and history of horror movies. That's our goal. The ABCs, teaching the ABCs and learning ourselves the ABCs of horror. There's a lot of classics that we haven't seen. And there's a lot of kind of unshown gems that I think that we could probably pick out and share to the world as well.
Yeah.
This is a podcast for horror movie experts and non-experts alike. The mission statement for this essentially is we're all going to learn about horror, about tropes, about themes, about all the cliches, all the different things about horror, and just be a bit of a love letter. At least 3 letters, A, B, and C. All the letters, if anything, to the horror movie genre. I have definitely, through our relationship, come to appreciate horror movies way more. As far as presenting credentials, I was a big Scream fan growing up. Scream 2 was the first horror movie I'd ever really been exposed to. My friend's mother rented it on pay-per-view back when you used to have to call a number, and then they would make the movie play on repeat on one channel that you paid for on cable. And I saw the beginning of Scream and parts of it throughout the night, and that shit stuck with me. My interests were definitely kind of more the mainstream popcorn horror movies, like, the Nightmare on Elm Streets and a lot of the Wes Craven fare. A little bit of Friday the 13th, but, it was mainly like those kind of big horror franchises. Loved Halloween. And then I met you. And I really fell down a rabbit hole. What is your history with horror movies, Liz?
Let's see. I think my first horror movie was Nightmare on Elm Street. That was the one that my mom let me pick out at Blockbuster when I got old enough. From there, it kind of just stemmed out. I think the biggest thing that branched me from Nightmare on Elm Street was Bravo had this show. Every Halloween, they'd show 100 scariest movie moments, which was my shit. Every year on Halloween, I was watching that until they stopped doing it, and then they did the 30 scariest movie moments, and they weren't even that they weren't good picks in my book, at least.
They had already done multiple 100 movie scariest moments for all the classics. That show was like a distillation of all the best scenes from the most iconic scenes from the most iconic horror movies.
Oh, yeah.
You shared those with me as well, and they were definitely very interesting, if not very spoilery.
I mean, incredibly spoilery, but it was one of those things that kind of I started writing down the names of the movies that I wanted to watch. There were a few scenes that they showed that freaked me out as a kid, and I'm like, I gotta see this movie. I need to. At a certain point, I stopped getting scared. It's the endorphin rush. You need to keep going.
You had your hit early on, and you just needed to keep going from there.
Yeah, pretty much. Then I used to watch people review horror movies on YouTube. There was a channel I found that was talking about all these weird indie films that I'd never heard of, like Cannibal Holocaust and a Serbian film, and I was just like, what the hell is this? Where have I gone? This is the weirdest part of the internet. That's that part where you're in it too long and you're I need to back out, but I don't know how.
That's the next level for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess when you were chasing that high, that is certainly the next. I mean, but where do you go from there, though? I guess is the real question.
It gets really bad. There's a person I do watch. She did a huge 3-parter of the iceberg of horror movies. As the list goes down, it gets into really weird, disgusting shit that people have just decided this is horror, and I'm like, that's not horror, that's something entirely different. That's still horrifying.
That's just a snuff film.
Yeah, it's really not. Like, there's a line that I have, and I've crossed it once, and I will never go back because I'm just like, that's too much for me. I'm good, thanks. Let's go back to the fake things, please.
Yeah, we're not doing the real things here on the
no.
ABCs of Horror.
No.
There's a real distinct difference between real life violence and movie violence. I can very much appreciate movie violence because it's fake and there's an artistry to it and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Real life violence, if I saw anything like what is represented in half the movies I've seen, it would just turn my stomach.
Yeah.
I can't handle real violence and blood and all that stuff. But
right.
movie violence I'm totally down with. And I want more of it, damn it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think my whole credential is that I got the taste for horror early. By early, I mean like maybe 13. It just kind of blossomed into this, like, I like the weird indie shit. I like the underground stuff, but not like too underground.
Yeah.
And I can appreciate a Cronenberg movie. Even though I fucking hate body horror, I can still appreciate it.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, and if we're throwing out ages, I was 7 when I saw. It was on pay-per-view. It had just come out on pay-per-view, Scream 2. So I was 7 when I saw Scream 2, and I was like 9 years old when I fell in love with Blade, and that's a very violent, very very violent movie. The Blade movies aren't particularly scary. They kind of are. Guillermo del Toro's movie, I would say, was a little bit scarier than the first one, but both of them have kind of scary elements for a kid.
Yeah, definitely for a kid, I'd say.
But yeah, just that was a good introduction to movie violence and action and vampires. Blah. I'm sure we'll get to some vampires at some point, Liz.
Probably.
Speaking of which, on every podcast, we will be going through the alphabet. Today, we are doing the letter N. The movie we are reviewing is The Night House. On each podcast, I would like to go over some of the other movies within the genre that start with the same letter, a little bit of education, some of the classics, some of the not so classics potentially, and there are other movies within this genre, within the horror movie genre, that also start with N that I probably am not mentioning, which I would love to hear about from you all. If we don't end up covering the movie that you think of when you think of movies that start with the letter N within horror movies, you can always contact us at abchorrorpod@gmail.com. That's abchorrorpod@gmail.com.
Yeah.
So let us know other movies that we may have missed that start with the letter N, and we could get to it the next time. But speaking of vampires and movies that start with the letter N, Nosferatu. Click, 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 click. 1922's Nosferatu, starring famously Max Schreck, adapting, it's Dracula. Nosferatu is Dracula, they just couldn't get the rights, so they called it Nosferatu, and the rest is history. Have you ever actually watched Nosferatu, or have you just seen the clips of Max Schreck kind of gliding around and being creepy?
That one. I haven't seen the movie ever. I've seen the weird clips of him just like peeking around corners or coming out of the ship with this weird like hands looking like a fucking rat. I mean, it's the quintessential horror. Like, it's
terrifying imagery.
Yeah.
There's actually a really good movie, and I haven't seen it, but I've only heard great things. They made a movie about the making of that movie with John Malkovich and Willem Dafoe. And Willem Dafoe plays Max Schreck, and he's actually a vampire.
Okay.
So he's playing the actor who's playing Nosferatu, but he's really actually a Nosferatu. And it's kind of like they're making that movie, and it's dealing with that whole thing. And
interesting.
Yeah. Apparently Robert Eggers is talking about doing a Nosferatu movie and wants Willem Dafoe to play Nosferatu. So I mean,
that would be an interesting Nosferatu. I wouldn't say he couldn't do it. I would just be it'd be weird.
The movie was Shadow of the Vampire. He was a lot younger when he played that, so because that was out in 2000. That was 22 years ago.
Yeah.
He would definitely look more Nosferatu-ish these days. Or like that one SNL sketch where he kept saying, "You're vampire, that you vampire looking ass, vampire head looking ass."
Why are you in bed, Dracula? You know y'all don't sleep at night with your vampire head ass.
I mean, he's got the smile for it, at least.
Yeah, because Nosferatu, everybody knows his famous smile. Another classic you can't not mention if you're talking about horror movies that start with the letter N. Night of the Living Dead, 1968, George A. Romero. You gotta mention it. It's a classic. Mm-hmm. We talk a lot about, in our reviews, themes and social issues and things that are reflected, that, like, it's a reflection of society. And that movie definitely has a lot of that. Again, a movie I have not... Well, I've seen Nosferatu, but I have not seen Night of the Living Dead.
Uh-huh.
That's a little bit of my white whale. And I would very much like to watch that and probably talk about it on a podcast at some point whenever we come back around to N, because I know it's a very influential movie. I quote it all the time. They're coming to get you, Barbara. I do that to Liz every now and again. It's been a bit since I've done that to you.
Well, you just did, so.
They're coming to get you, Elizabeth. It doesn't have the same ring. You gotta say Barbara.
It's the cadence of it all.
Yeah, we'll definitely watch that at some point and talk about that. It's been around for 50 plus years. I know the general gist of it, although I haven't seen only a few clips from it. I know how it ends, the general gist, but I've only seen very small clips, mainly the "I'm coming to get you, Barbara," and maybe a couple of the shuffling zombie scenes.
Yeah, I was going to say the "coming to get you, Barbara" thing is kind of like it's the most quotable line. Like, if they showed in another movie, that's the part they show.
Yeah, generally. Or the zombies, like, shuffling at a door or something like that.
Yeah, but, like otherwise, you don't really see too much of the movie.
But, I mean, any zombie movie made after that owes a debt to that movie. And it reinvented... Because before that, zombie movies were more so like... oh, we're on a Caribbean island and there are voodoo zombies here. And it's not the same kind of thing. It's not the, I'm coming to eat your flesh and kill you and turn you into a zombie movie.
I also want to say, and maybe someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe I've heard that it is the first black lead in a horror movie.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you're right about that. And that's one of the social issues that tackles is, racism and all that jazz.
Yeah.
I can't wait to watch it now that we've been talking about it, because it's been on the list for so long. And, I'm 32 years old at this point, and I really feel like there's a good handful of quintessential movies that I've never seen, that because I'm such a film buff, not even just a horror buff. I'm a major film buff, and you definitely made me a bit more of a horror movie expert.
Oh, hey, thanks.
Before I would have just pointed to John Carpenter and Wes Craven, but now I definitely have a bit more of a wider breadth of
wider net.
Yeah, horror movie knowledge. And
yeah.
Speaking of Wes Craven, Nightmare on Elm Street. Technically it's The Nightmare on Elm Street, but today we're reviewing The Night House, and the doesn't count. That's just like an article, right? You don't count the thes and the us. Or no, it's A Nightmare on Elm Street, not The Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah.
You don't count those as the alphabetical title of a thing. It's Nightmare. It's N.
Hard agree.
Excellent. Nightmare on Elm Street is somewhat topical now because there's a trial going on with one of its stars. That dates this episode. And it was his first movie, El Señor Johnito Depp.
Johnito Depp, yes.
Johnny Depp's first movie starring Heather Langenkamp. We got to see her speak. It was shortly after Wes Craven passed away.
Yeah.
We had gone to see it at the Alamo, didn't we? And then...
yeah, it was at the Alamo, and they did a Skype call-in.
Yeah, with Heather Langenkamp.
On the big screen with her.
But we had just watched it, I think, at home.
Yeah, it was relatively recently.
Yeah, we had just watched it, and then shortly after Wes Craven passed away, and then they were doing this screening at the Alamo Draft House where she was Skyping in. And I was like, I really want to go see. I know we just watched this, but I really want to go see this again.
Well, I mean, that's the thing you can't beat. Like, that's an experience.
Yeah, you can't pass that up. And I wanted to hear her talk about her experience working with Wes Craven. And obviously, they worked a lot more closely with The New Nightmare, because that was a whole kind of love letter to her performance in the first movie, because she didn't even come back for the second one, right? No, she didn't.
Was she not in the second one?
No, it was the kid. It was the blonde kid, remember?
Oh, yeah.
It was the boy.
She came back in the third one, though?
Yeah, she might have had a cameo in one of the later ones, maybe.
I think the one with the dream whatever was her.
Dream Warriors.
I think Dream Warriors had her in it.
Welcome to prime time, bitch.
I just love that Freddy's catchphrase inevitably became bitch.
Ends with bitch.
Just some catchphrase, some quip with bitch attached to the end.
Exactly.
Talk about influential movies of the horror genre, somewhat riding off the success of Halloween, which invented the slasher movies. Wes Craven kind of bringing his own angle to it with the whole dream sequence, murderer, serial killer stalking you in your dreams. He only lives in dreams, and you give him power through your fear. That's a quintessential movie, and I remember being captivated by that one as a kid. What was your experience with Nightmare on Elm Street?
This kind of tells you how I treat most horror movies. My friends thought I was a sick motherfucker, apparently, because I watched the first death in that movie, laughed hysterically, rewound it, and watched it again.
With everybody in the room?
No, like I just told them I had watched it because I watched it by myself. My mom didn't want to watch it with me.
In the scenario, I was imagining you watching with your friends.
And I'm just like the weirdo.
You maniacally laughing your head off, you grabbing the clicker, the remote from your friend, and then rewinding it and then hitting play and watching it again.
No.
See, that I could see
That
they would
would've
think you're a
been
sicko
funnier.
from that.
Well, they still thought I was a sicko because they're like, because I told them about it, and I think I had shown it to them. I showed one of my friends the scene, and she's like, "Oh my god." And I was like, that was hilarious, right? And she's like, no, it's not. And I'm like, it's a fucking movie. It's not real. It's funny.
He's getting sucked into his waterbed. Look at that. Oh, look at the blood go everywhere.
I mean, it's not, there's nothing scary about it to me. It wasn't scary to me. I don't know why. It just didn't freak me out. I wanted it to. I enjoyed it.
It definitely scared me as a kid. I wasn't quite at that level at that age, because I did see this at a pretty young age on TV, and Freddy scared the shit out of me. But in the first one, he is scary, and like in the later movies, he becomes you're egging Freddy on to kill these annoying teenagers.
Yeah, because it goes from like taking itself seriously enough, you know, like he's still kind of quippy, but he's got like he's more of on the, I mean, they're all dark humor, but it's still more on the darker side of like, I'm just coming to kill you.
Yeah, he'll cut off his fingers and they'll ooze green pus and he'll laugh. Like that's the level of, you know. And
like if you saw that in your dream, obviously, I think anyone would be terrified. Then you start like going to like Dream Warriors, and it's just kind of like, he's just got a line for everybody. At that point, as it goes on, like it just comes down to like the deaths are just like, what's he gonna do today? That's why I enjoyed it the most, is because it had the defining line as to when things were happening, and it was just a fun movie to watch because it wasn't like, it was serious, but it was still entertaining. It was done well. And again, I was 13 and I could appreciate it.
And that series became a bit of an Ouroboros. By the time you got to New Nightmare, it was, is it Ouroboros? The snake eating itself. I always get that mixed up.
Yeah, it muddies the waters at a certain point, and then they brought it back. And it's just kind of one of those things where it's like, you can't beat Robert, you can't beat Wes Craven, you can't beat just the original. It's good.
True.
It just kind of starts, but a lot of these slashers do that. They just kind of trail into, and you're like, okay, we're just here to watch people die then, I guess. That's all we're here for.
Once it comes around to the third reinvention of the franchise, it becomes a bit of the waters are super muddy. And yeah, that's not one that aged well ultimately. I mean, the original, I definitely some of those movies in that series, particularly the earlier ones on, I would say the first, second, and Dream Warriors, which I think is the third.
Yes, it is.
Those are definitely the highlights. And New Nightmare is interesting in and of itself, I think, because that's Wes Craven's like prototype Scream. He definitely carries a lot of meta awareness into the Scream films from, you know, what he learned from doing the New Nightmare stuff. As opposed to commenting on the horror movie genre at large, he was commenting on the series itself and what it had become, and very fascinating. And it brought a lot of his own experiences to the thing as well. He's in the movie as himself. It's really weird. And Johnny Depp getting smashed through a TV or something like that.
Oh, no.
To bring that full circle.
No, he doesn't go through a TV, but gotcha.
I think we'll save some other ends. I have other ends on there.
Yeah.
We'll mention some more later. Yeah. So that's our letters of the day segment. That's not an actual name I have for it yet, but this is our first one. This is the pilot. We're figuring it out. So
give us a little bit.
Liz, are you ready to review The Night House?
I am.
Let's do it. Elizabeth, today we are reviewing the movie The Night House.
The Night House.
The Night House. Directed by David Bruckner, starring Rebecca Hall, Sarah Goldberg, Von D. Curtis Hall. I haven't seen that guy in a long time. He was the neighbor.
Right.
Written by Ben Collins and Luke Piotrowski. Are you familiar with any of their work, Liz?
Probably not, but let's see.
Doesn't look like anything that I recognize.
No, they're working on Hellraiser with the...
Well, yeah. So David Bruckner, director of The Ritual, Southbound, VHS. He did segments in VHS and Southbound. The Ritual was his first feature-length movie where he wasn't just working on a short.
Yeah.
And The Night House seems to be his follow-up. And now he's doing a Hellraiser movie, which, I don't know.
Could be interesting.
Could be interesting. Yeah, I think he might have the chops for it. He makes good-looking movies that have, you know, spooky elements. Well, anyway, let's not talk about that. Let's just talk about the movie that he directed.
The Night House.
The Night House. The synopsis is: a widow begins to uncover her recently deceased husband's disturbing secrets. It's really just as basic as that.
It's a pretty cut and dry, an hour and 20?
No, an hour and 47 minutes. It definitely...
Yeah, but I mean, it really gets to the point really quick, though, as to what's going on. And it, builds up, but it doesn't,
It has a really good opening sequence where, during the credits, we're not really told what happened, but we're just seeing shots around the Night House, the titular Night House. Or is it the Night House of the title is?
Oh, I don't know.
Oh.
Maybe.
Question marks. But we see shots throughout the house. Clearly, two people live here. There's pictures. There's pictures of the woman who lives in the house, the man who lives in the house, pictures of them together. We eventually start to see signs of there's a lot of tissues on the table.
It's disheveled. It's not being taken care of.
And we see in the bathroom that there is still all, nothing seems amiss. It still has the man's stuff, the woman's stuff in the bathroom. And then
nothing's been cleaned.
A widow arrives at her home accompanied by somebody else who gives her a casserole or something. They clearly came from a funeral. And so it's oh, okay.
Right.
That just happened. Her husband's dead. Mm-hmm. And then one of the funniest things just before a title reveal, she sets the casserole on the kitchen counter and just kind of
looks at it and then just tosses it in the trash.
shoves it right in the trash. and then the Night House.
Yeah, pretty much. It's an interesting title reveal.
That gave me a good little chuckle. But I like things like that. I mean, a big element of the movie is there's an element of detective work. She's trying to figure out what her husband was up to. It's slowly doled out that he killed himself and she doesn't understand why. And I feel like that title sequence almost sets up that vibe.
But also kind of sets her character up too, as to how she deals with things and how she is with treating with other people and things like that. She took the hospitality and just trashed it.
That character, Beth, is Rebecca Hall's character. Her husband, Owen, was the one who killed himself. And she is, the way she deals with stuff, the way Beth deals with stuff.
Yeah, it's very odd.
Early on in the movie, we see that she's a teacher. She ends up going back to work almost immediately. And her friend, who also is a teacher, is it's the end of the school year.
She's like, you didn't have to show up, but...
And she's like, I just wanted to keep busy and all that stuff. And there's a scene where a student's mother shows up. Her son was absent when he was supposed to turn in a project or something. And so, by the way, the kid's name was Hunter, one of 3 hunters that she had in her class, apparently. That joke kind of made me laugh because I went to school with probably 5 hunters as well.
Oh, it's a common name, apparently.
Yeah, it's pretty basic. On the last day of school, she said that he could make it up and do his presentation, and she wasn't there because her husband had killed himself that day.
Beth is like, I was off Thursday, so took a personal day, and that's when the project was due, so he wasn't able to make it up.
And the mom says, well, we all have personal days.
Yeah, the way she said it was just kind of well, that's not an excuse. And it's just well, if you really must know.
She doesn't even say that.
My husband. No, but it's just kind of my husband killed himself.
Yeah, she doesn't even say if you really must know. She just straight up is well, I wasn't here on Thursday because my husband shot himself.
Yeah, click, boom, in the face. And it's just okay. And the lady's like, did you want a B? You wanted a B. Oh, no, you really wanted an A. And she goes, no, I'll take the B.
Yeah. Just the way she's going about it is just so
very...
not even passive aggressive. It's pretty much aggressive.
Yeah, it's why the hell did you come in here? What was the point?
Well, it's the last thing she cares about, clearly. And she is just so hyper-focused, especially as things start to unfold. She starts to uncover, well, one, her husband shot himself. She didn't even know he had a gun.
No.
She finds pictures on his phone. There's weird things start to happen, like in that very scene where she's talking to the student's mother really early on in the movie. It's first 15 minutes.
Yeah.
She has a lapse where we see that she loses an hour, she falls asleep at her desk. And when she
was also looking up something different than something else that transitions.
Well, yeah, when she wakes up, there's search results for a gun.
Yeah,
which was weird. It makes sense ultimately as you go throughout the movie, but it's just a slow unfurling of
insanity.
My husband clearly was hiding something. And is it that it's one of those things? Is Beth going crazy, or is it her husband that was maybe doing something? Maybe there was something satanic involved, or something like
that's
that.
where I thought this was going, because when she looked at the stuff and she was looking at blueprints, I was looking at it, I was like,
her husband was an architect and had built their house.
and I was sitting there thinking, did he like build a gigantic ritual thing to like something? I mean, I've seen that before, at least in movies, where it's like they've done something and now whoever lives in this thing or whatever has to deal with it. And it's like, it just kind of came off like that. I was like, did he start something that he didn't know how to finish and now his wife is now screwed? Like,
yeah.
What did he do?
And there's elements throughout the movie as it goes along that is it like, was he trying to protect her from something? Was he trying to lure something? Like what was his motive behind everything? So yeah, that's essentially the movie. There's this kind of curious vibe throughout it. I think, when it comes to the scares and the horror aspect of it, it's like any movie you see where it's just somebody investigating, walking around corners and something kind of spooky's happening. But I think it does it really well.
It gave me a lot of the Hill House stuff from the Netflix show.
Haunting of Hill House.
Kind of gave me a lot of that vibe, especially with the way they went about certain angles and things like that. It was very interesting.
It was very Mike
intriguing.
Flanagan to a certain degree.
Yeah.
It was almost like Midnight Mass vibes, where like that guy who is seeing the lady he killed from the car accident.
That's what I was thinking. It was kind of like a lot of that weird stuff.
We talk about this a lot, and Mark Kermode talks about this a lot, because that's where we got it. Mark Kermode, Simon Mayo on their BBC 5 Live radio show. Mark Kermode always talks about like some horror movies just kind of do the quiet, like everything's quiet and you're lulled into this false sense of security, and then bang, like it's just a loud noise and it just scares you. It's not actually doing any work to scare you. It's just scaring you because it's
startling.
And this movie, I think it does I think it has pretty good balance. It definitely does it doesn't do quiet bang, but it definitely does do ramped up loud noises that can kind of like.
But I wouldn't say it was a jostling.
No, it
noise.
built up to
or
it.
Loud noise. It was one of those things where it was just like, oh my, like. It wasn't like I'm annoyed now. It was just, it worked. It was effective in what it was trying to do versus just being like obnoxious about it.
Yeah, there was an element of she's sleepwalking and or clearly dreaming at points. She's having these really lucid dreams where she can't tell if it's reality or not. And we can't tell eventually. I think early on it's kind of like clearly this is a dream, but there are also points early on where it's just she's awake and it's the daytime, but she's still seeing things, and there's still like things that don't necessarily jive with what reality should be and all that stuff. But she's sleepwalking around, and there's a couple moments where it's very clearly a dream. Like she'll walk over to a window because she got a phone call, which this movie did a lot of those kind of narration things where it's, or not narration, but like she's hearing a voice talk to her, and it's kind of doing like the go to the window, and it's just really creepy and kind of like, it gave me goosebumps.
It's unsettling for sure.
It like, and I like anything that can kind of give me goosebumps, and I feel like Mike Flanagan does that all the time in all of his stuff.
Right.
I'm always kind of to the point where it's just like, ooh, that's so cool, and it just gives me goosebumps. Used to get that with movie trailers all the time, not these days, but maybe Spider-Man No Way Home, that was a pretty cool one.
Yeah.
That gave me goosebumps.
Batman didn't give you goosebumps?
Liz, this isn't a Batman podcast. How dare you?
I'm sorry.
Bait me into Batman. How dare you Bateman me?
I wasn't Bateman you.
But yeah, no, it has a lot of that kind of psychological. It's definitely a psychological horror movie. It's one of those things where it's you don't know what reality is.
Yeah, it does. It toes the line very well, because it was reminding me a bit of like Nightmare on Elm Street, where it was just kind of like she'd drift off and then something weird would have happened. But with Nightmare on Elm Street, you knew that line because you either had the song, there were at least obvious points of like, we're in the dream world now. This is not reality. This is painfully obvious. Where in this one, it's kind of like it's towing that line so like it's just such a gray area for when she's actually dreaming or not.
Especially as it goes along. And then even then, it's like, okay, she was dreaming, but what the fuck is happening right now? There's a lot of stuff they do with reflections and mirrors, and I noticed that early on, but it really ramps up towards the middle and then the end. They really lean heavily into that, which a lot of the time, if there's reflections and mirrors involved, a lot of the time, and a lot of horror movies in general, it's like you are really the person doing everything because you just didn't know, which isn't the case in this movie.
Right.
No spoilers or anything, but it does a lot of that stuff, and it's about self-reflection and nothing and something. You know what I'm saying, Liz?
Yeah.
You said you kind of didn't know what to say about the movie. And I want to explore that because we watched it and I kind of wanted to save our conversation about the movie. So yeah, like where'd you fall with it? What you thought about it?
Generalized feelings for this was just kind of like, it was a good thriller. I mean, I don't think this is classified as actual horror, but
yeah,
well,
horror
it says
mystery,
horror mystery thriller.
It's got horror in it. It's got plenty of horror.
It's got horror in it, but I think I like psychological like stuff and I like things like this, but it kind of just reflected a lot of like Secret Window to me a lot, that it was kind of, I don't know. I knew where it was kind of trying to go, but I was still confused towards the back end as to like what this all was supposed to mean. I mean, it's talking about suicide and all this kind of stuff and grief and how to deal with it. I mean, it's kind of glossing over everything, but also, did I feel like did I enjoy this movie? Did I just like, I wasn't sure if I like liked it or hated it or just kind of was like meh about it. I didn't know where I sat because I didn't know, the ending was so just kind of like, I don't know what the hell just happened.
I feel like it gets lost in its themes a little bit.
Maybe.
Because it definitely has some themes running through it, particularly around what's actually happening. But I don't know if it deals with it that well.
Right.
And I think in execution, the movie is well done. I just think some of it's missing maybe in the writing of, you want to feel by the end of it, oh, okay, I understand everything that's happened and why it happened, which you do, but I feel like the writers were kind of missing some threads that could have made it more satisfying, or at the very least more clear.
I was going to say, because I didn't feel like there was no like vindication of something or any, it just got weird and then it ended.
Yeah.
And I was kind of like, where am I supposed to sit now? Where are my emotions? Where am I supposed to be? I want to be there, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
With no spoilers and no context, it is very much a dramatic, straightforward version and mashup of Nightmare on Elm Street and Final Destination.
I could see that.
Those are the two movies that it's kind of aping from to a certain degree.
I feel like a little bit of Secret Window, too.
Yeah, I could see that.
And the
for
idea
sure.
of that.
Yeah, where there's this mystery that's going on and you're in this lake house. Like, it is that thing. The scares are good. I think it has some interesting, like, what the fuck is going on to it.
Yeah.
I think it hits all the beats that a movie like this is going to hit. It kind of reminded me of His House.
Yeah.
Remember that movie? With the refugees?
Because, yeah, I could see that.
Yeah. Moving to England.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely saw a bit of that. It's just, somebody kind of losing their mind in their house and dealing with loss and grief. And I feel like in execution handled everything well enough, and it was certainly watchable. And Rebecca Hall, I mean, she carried that movie so hard. Her choices in film roles, because we had seen her in a movie called Christine.
God, that movie.
Where she was like a news anchor who, spoilers for that movie if you haven't seen it, by the end of it she kills herself live on air, and she carries that movie as well, and she's great in it, but it's just like her movie choices are interesting in regards to,
I mean, I don't know what
subject.
you're saying. Christine's by far the most uplifting film you can watch.
Well, it's about a haunted car. And she's great. I think she's fantastic, but she definitely picks very dark movies to do. And some of them, I did like Christine. I thought that was a fine movie, but it also kind of had the feeling that this one left me with a little bit where it was like, okay, that was a movie. And
now I move on.
Yeah, moving on, I guess. I think this was a little bit tighter than Christine.
Yeah.
In how it was told, and it was a little less flabby, but this was definitely flabby. I think this could have been an easy hour and a half. I think I would have enjoyed it more and probably been a little bit more forgiving, because it's like hour and 47 minutes. It takes its time, which feels nice, but at the same time, I think there's some...
I think it takes too much time. There's definitely some parts that could have... But yeah, it could have been shorter. I
think a movie like this, not that I'm saying it needs to be a fun romp or anything, but...
No. Better pacing in certain spots.
Yeah, it doesn't need to overstay its welcome.
Yeah.
Either. Especially when the majority of the horror is her walking around her house or trying to figure out what's going on.
Or reading books.
Which, I mean, it didn't spend too much time on, like, it wasn't boring. Like, she she always flipped right to the page she needed to flip to figure out what was going on. She would thumb through it a little bit and then would land on whatever page, just like anybody in a movie does. But I mean, if you're looking for like kind of a really kind of mind fuck kind of movie, this is definitely that kind of thing. Like there's one point where she's in a dream, and there's this whole thing about, is like, is there another house that's the opposite version of her house on the other side of the lake? Is there like, is that really a thing, or is it like a reflection, or does it really exist? Does it not exist? And she goes to that place and she opens the door, and then we see her in the open door. The camera pans over. She's asleep on the couch. Then she looks over the door. There's nobody standing in the door, but the door is open. And then she walks towards the door, but then we find out that was actually, we were looking at a mirror, and she is now going to close the door, and everything's flipped. Everything's flipped back. Like, that was one of my favorite shots kind of couple of shots in the entire movie, because it was like constantly like, okay, it's a different spot. It's like, okay, that's not really happening, but this is happening, but is this really happening?
Yeah.
It's all about perspectives, and there's a lot of that going on in the movie, and reflections, and like that was really cool to me.
There's a lot of mind trickery.
Yeah, and it really messes with you too, because it's like, the thing is, I had seen this, I watched the first half of the movie, and then because you were talking to your mom, and then you came out, and I was like, let's just restart it, we'll watch it together from the beginning. And so I had seen that shot twice.
Yeah.
And the first time I was like, whoa, that was cool, but I don't know exactly what just happened. So second time I was able to actually pay attention to it and see the mechanics of it all. But first time around, it's disorienting, and it's like, what just happened?
Yeah, definitely. I guess as a closing statement before spoilers for me would be just I would still recommend it. It's just one of those things that I just didn't know how it sat with me, because I didn't know where it just kind of felt like it needed to end, and it didn't know what it wanted to do.
Yeah.
Or it was telling me something that I just didn't understand. That was probably it, more so than anything. But I still would recommend it, and it's streaming on HBO and streaming on other things too. So I mean, it's, if you have the ability to watch it, I would highly recommend it.
HBO Max is where it is right now.
HBO Max, that's what it was. Yeah,
that's where we watched it. And yeah, and it came out in 2021, I think was the date it had on HBO Max. I think it says 2020 on IMDb, but so it's pretty fresh, and I definitely recommend it as well. I think it's pretty sharp, but it's got a little bit of flab, but it's pretty sharp, and it's definitely entertaining to watch.
I would agree.
Do you want to talk spoilers, Liz?
Yeah, spoilers.
What's your biggest question in regards to what was going on?
Well,
okay, well, do you want me to explain it as I understand it?
Sure.
Pretty early on in the movie, she tells this story about how when she was 17 in high school, she got in a car accident and she was technically dead for 4 minutes. She was airlifted to the hospital. When she came to and was recovering and all that stuff, the question everybody asked her was, did you see anything? You were dead for 4 minutes. Did you see anything? Was there heaven? Was there nothing or whatever? And her answer was there was nothing. And she didn't see anything. She was like, no light at the end of the tunnel, just the tunnel. Something we talked about as the movie was going on, and it was revealed kind of like the husband was seemingly building two houses, and one house is a mirror of the other house. And
he was trying to stave off something.
There was a book about like tricking demons or something like that.
Yeah.
There was a chapter specifically about tricking demons and like creating totems. And that's the entire reason why he's building the other house, is to make it think that she's there, because an entity, when she was dead, attached to her and wanted her back. It wanted her.
Yeah.
And so, like, I don't know how the husband found out about this outside of she had said, like, she had been struggling with depression and all that stuff. I think it was...
Yeah, she brings up the suicide note, and then she said, like, well, she's like, she's at a bar with her colleagues from the school, other teachers or whatever, and they were saying, like, well, were there any red flags as to him wanting to, kill himself? Like, was he depressed? What did you notice anything? And she's like, I didn't notice anything. That was me. I was the one who suffered with those things, not him.
Yeah.
So I don't know. And see, that's the thing is, like, I guess there's that, like, my brain kind of did the thing at the end where it was like, well, if this is supposed to be coming off of, like, dealing with depression and trying to pull yourself out of that dark place, then this makes sense. Because she decided it's not worth it to stay with this dark entity of, depression and staying in this dark place because, Owen, decided to do that, but I have people who care about me and who love me, and I'm going to, I've made this decision to pull myself out of this and move on. If that was the case, then I understand what's going on. Otherwise,
that's pretty much it.
If there was another meaning, that was the one I took away from it.
It doesn't wrap a very tight bow on it, but
no.
The thing that kind of muddies it is she's struggling with suicidal thoughts, and because the thing is doing that, the nothing, whatever it is, the demon, whatever, that saw her when she was dead and attached itself to her. It wanted her. Mm-hmm. It says as much at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
So from then on, I think that moment early on in the movie when she loses that nearly an hour when she's grading stuff at the school and she sees that she was looking up handguns. Like, I think that's that thing trying to get her to buy a gun and kill herself.
Probably. Yeah.
Because early on, it's just like, oh, geez. Because I thought maybe she killed the husband.
Yeah.
It was a possibility early on in that movie. I wouldn't have known why, but ultimately, obviously, she hadn't.
But with all the mirrors and stuff and the self-reflection, like, it all makes sense because you need to look within to come, pull yourself out of things like this and all this kind of stuff and realize, I guess, what you have and things like that. But it's just kind of like...
But it gets muddied up by the fact that it's a demon. It's a literal demon and her husband had to kill people in order to... stave it off.
Yeah, I don't know about that. That's the part I think that confuses me and makes it hard to figure out.
Well, and that's where the themes get a little muddy.
Yeah.
His whole thing was he was there to make her feel better and he wanted to keep her safe. But in order to do that, he has to lure women who look like her to this mirror house out in the middle of the woods on the other side of the lake and murder them. I guess the thing is taking over him and it's acting through him to kill her, I guess. I don't think he was maliciously doing it. I think he was fighting it to a certain degree.
Well, because they showed that shot of her laying on him and he went to kill her and he stopped himself and he kissed her on the forehead and said, and the demon even through him says I tried, but he wouldn't let me. My thing is that going off of, obviously dealing with depression, dealing with it personally is hard, and having your family have to kind of see you like that is just as hard. And they try to do him trying to do anything and everything to make it better for her, which is what he's doing. Obviously, minus the weird killing of other women and whatever that is, which I don't understand. The other half of that is that he's actively just trying to help her in any way he can in some aspects of dealing with her depression. It's hard to see a loved one deal with it and not know how you can help and what you can do. It like you said, it gets muddied when he starts killing women and there's slews of them and this other house.
Well, and it's never explained. She says to her friend, who she tells the story about how she technically died for 4 minutes, Owen's the only person she ever told that story to, where she lives.
There was nothing.
That there was nothing and all that stuff. The question is raised through watching the movie. When did he find out? How did he find out?
There's a section of their life that we have missed that hasn't even been told about.
We never saw them together, period, before he had killed himself.
And we saw videotapes,
I guess we did see
tapes that she would watch, but the way she watched them, she didn't watch them with any sort of happiness, I miss him kind of face. It was I am seething, I'm pissed off.
Yeah,
she finally has that moment where I could even realize, okay, this is her final moment where she's finally accepted the grief. He's gone, I miss him, and she just breaks down. And that was the coming of I want him back, but I can't have him back because he's gone forever. It's over. There's too many things going on to try to get one idea out, which I assume is the depression and dealing with the darkness and the inner turmoil between you and yourself, which is the mirror aspect. But you're muddying it with the other demon / husband going to murder other women and building another house, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, well, he's an architect, and we do know that he was researching how to deal with this specific thing that somehow he knows.
Right.
Tips and tricks on how to trick demons.
To get them to stop finding.
And so he starts building that house and he follows what's laid out in those books, which is, it's just weird. And then the whole stalking of other women and
yeah, I don't.
taking them to the other place. Was he kind of making a deal with this thing just to keep her happy or keep her safe?
Yeah.
And was that thing kind of like, no, I want her. And so finally he's just like, I'm going to kill you.
Yeah.
I'm going to make you kill yourself. And then
I'm going to drive you to that point. Yeah, I don't know. Which is frustrating because, like, otherwise it's still a good, like, I would still recommend it highly, but
Again,
I wouldn't.
Very well made. Like,
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
well made and it's spooky. And I think some of the scares are really good. The way the nothing is represented. And we didn't
Yeah.
really talk about that so
No,
much up
we
to
can.
this point. But the way the nothing is represented is as like a figure, like a shape.
Like if you like it, the way you can stand, like an optical illusion kind of thing, where if you stand at a certain angle, all of a sudden it's a face or the profile of a face, and it'll turn, and you can hear the creaking of the house, and it moves, and it does all these. Like, that's interesting. That's great. I love that because that's a different way to show it versus showing the actual thing. Like, you never see anything, which is what I prefer.
Well, it is literally nothing. Like, it is the absence of.
Exactly.
Almost.
Right. But I mean, the stuff that they do with this movie is great. It's just trying to get their point across is just so all over the place, unfortunately. Which is why when we stopped watching, I was like, where's my emotion? What am I supposed to be feeling right now? Am I supposed to be vindicated that she didn't do it? I mean, I'm glad she didn't. That would be the one movie I've seen where she didn't kill herself. But I'm just saying, you know what I mean?
I think I found in my brain where the dissonance comes from. It's like about depression in two different ways. It's about the depression that comes from the loss of a loved one, because even then at the end, when she is on the boat where he had killed himself out on the lake, she is going to shoot herself, and her friend and her neighbor pull her out of it, which is what happens a lot of the time is reaching out and all that stuff. And
Right.
your friends can be the ones, your loved ones can be the ones that pull you out of that thing.
Yeah.
We see her looking back onto the lake. You can see the shadow in the reflection in the water of
like it's sitting in the boat.
Yeah, like it's sitting there. Is it that she suffers from depression in general throughout her life and suicidal from that, and that's kind of where some of the themes are playing? Or is it about the loss of a loved one and getting over that and all that? Because that feels like, oh, she's gotten over the loss, or she's just going to live with the loss of him. And like that felt more like a shade of, this is about losing her husband and not about dealing with depression in life in general. Like I feel like something like The Ritual, David Bruckner's previous movie, handles that stuff a lot better when it comes to the metaphorical and the literal and grief and regret and blaming yourself for a tragedy and things like that.
Yeah.
That does a better job at balancing those metaphors. There is a completely separate thing that's happening outside of the
But it doesn't get muddied
trauma,
in between.
but yeah, it doesn't get this weird mix up of like, what are you specifically talking about? It's pretty straightforward what that movie is talking about.
Yeah.
This movie is talking about depression, but in what way? Like, it's flipping around too many different things.
Which is just frustrating, but it is what it is. And it's still, again, it doesn't make it a great, like, any less of a great movie. It still has, like, great scares, great spooky atmosphere.
Good performances.
Great CGIs, great performances all together. So it's still great. It's just, unfortunately, what they're trying to tell you is just kind of all over the place.
Yeah, I think the writing is probably one of the weaker parts of the movie, but I think it's handled well enough by a competent director.
And a great actress.
Yeah, and a great actress. Yeah, Rebecca Hall carries it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to see her do more directing. I still haven't seen her movie Passing, her directorial debut. It's on Netflix. I got to watch it, and I hear good things.
Yeah.
And I'm very curious about it, but I'd like to see her expand on into other things because she's a very talented actor, and I think everything I've seen her in between, I think the first thing I ever saw her in was The Prestige, which was one of my favorite movies for a long time. Again, her character and everything kind of deals with suicide and like depression. Like there is a theme.
There is
a theme throughout her filmography. I hope she's doing okay. okay.
I was gonna say, Rebecca Hall, are you okay? You wanna
No,
talk?
she seems to be a very creative person, and I've watched pretty long interviews with her, and she seems to be really good about playing characters that are in touch with their emotions a lot more. And like, as an actor, you want to play a complicated person. And
Well, yeah, it's a little bit easier. It's a lot more fun to deep dive into all those feelings versus, oh, I'm always happy, everything's great. It's not always, sunshine and roses.
Indeed. I think that's about all we have thoughts-wise on our review for The Night House. And now on to the conclusion of the podcast. And to round out our show, we will be moving on to our final segment. Now, on this segment, we typically will be taking questions from the audience, from you all. If you care to submit a email to abchorrorpod@gmail.com, and in the subject line, just include a question of the pod or something like that.
Question of the pod.
Just put question in your subject line so I know it's specifically for the question that you would like to submit. Today, this is our first podcast. This is the pilot episode, so we don't have an audience to submit a question for us to answer. Typically, I want these questions to be about the horror movie genre. Questions can range from anything to, what's your top movie where somebody gets stabbed in the hand? And then we're going to have to spend a lot of time researching.
Ted! Hey, Ted, where the hell's the corkscrew?
But, maybe underrated horror movies, actors, questions about productions, questions about movies, questions about specific genres within horror. The sky's the limit. Ask us interesting questions, and maybe your question will get picked. I figured I'd start us off with a real easy, light one that I came up with myself. And the question is as follows. What's the next evolution of horror as a genre?
Oh, that's super easy to answer, Dan.
When we were going to record the rest of this podcast, because we've recorded this in segments, I wanted to wait because the next day we were going to go see Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. Obviously, Sam Raimi coming back to the director's chair. Sam Raimi, influential horror movie director of the Evil Dead series and countless other movies, Darkman. Quick and the Dead, a million movies, and most recently Doctor Strange. And I knew he was going to be bringing some of his horror elements to the MCU. I figured that'd be worth having part of the conversation because I think at this point, not that horror has not been a part of the mainstream, but since, the MCU movies, the Marvel movies, they're like the most popular of all the movies in the world for the last decade plus. The idea of the MCU, this family-friendly franchise that definitely gets dark at points. And after seeing the movie, and again, no spoilers, we're not going to get into specifics on the Doctor Strange movie, but I definitely want to talk about some of the elements. This is going to be the first exposure of horror to a whole new generation of children.
Yeah, God, yes.
We're going to see this. And I think Sam Raimi is an interesting choice to do that, because I know Scott Derrickson, the director of Sinister and Exorcism of Emily Rose, and the director of the first Doctor Strange movie. He was going to be directing this movie initially. When they announced it, he was very excited to make the first, what he referred to as first MCU horror movie. And
Right.
I think what we got is a blend of both. It felt like a Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie because Sam Raimi directed the original 3 Spider-Man movies with Tobey Maguire. I think he brought a lot of that sensibility along with his Evil Dead horror movie sensibility to Doctor Strange. What did you think of the elements that he brought to the movie without spoiling anything, Liz?
I think I had said in the car that if you hadn't said this was a Sam Raimi movie, we could have started it and I would have said, is this a Sam Raimi movie?
Yeah, his style was all over it.
Painfully obvious that it's his movie. He's got his style. And I appreciate most body horror. But there's still moments when I could watch something and go, oh my God, that's a little excessive. Trail it back a little bit. And like watching it in the theater with certain things that happened everybody's reacting, even me, because I'm just like, they went there. Why did we do that to these children? These poor kids. Like, they don't need to see this. And it's PG-13. It was pretty tame, I guess, for PG-13, but still, like, it's scotching a line.
See, there were some parts where it's definitely, they cut away or they don't focus on something, and they just allude to what happened in regards to some violence that happened.
Yes.
In the movie. But there's a couple moments in that movie where I'm just like, oh my gosh, how is that in a PG-13 movie?
How'd they get away with it? You know what I mean?
Yeah, how'd they get away with that? I mean, it's not, I guess, some of it is literally the idea of it, but you look into the eyes of a character and just watch them die in a horrific way. There's one specifically that I'm thinking about. And my mind's blown just thinking about it. And it that took me by major surprise that you could have something like that in a movie like that. But, like, this isn't anything new to children's movies. The Indiana Jones series and a million other movies, kids movies, a lot of the Spielberg kind of childhood movies definitely have some of the edgier, more violent things. I mean, he's like, Spielberg, I don't think Spielberg really gets brought up into the discussion of horror too often. He definitely brought a lot to childhood horror.
Yeah.
His stuff had an edge to it, and it had darkness, and it had some violence in there.
Well, I remember watching, because I hadn't seen any of the Indiana Jones, and when we started watching them and going through the scene with the tomb and everything, and like the guy's face just melting. When
they opened the Ark.
I was just like, this is for children? Who's watching this?
Well, then there's like gross skeletons and a bunch of other stuff, and like, it's a adventure serial kind of throwback movie.
I mean, but like The Mummy, I mean, we just recently watched the third one, but I mean, The Mummy still has some horrifying things in it that as a kid, when I saw it, it still freaked me out, and I wasn't that old.
The scarab beetles scared the crap out of me.
The scarab beetles, the tongue being ripped out of that guy, like him taking parts of the people. I was like, what the hell? Like, it's gross.
So, like Scream 2 was my first Scream movie, The Mummy Returns was my first Mummy movie, because we got that on VHS, so...
Gotcha.
I had seen that a bunch of times, really liked that movie, and then went back to the first one. I could definitely appreciate the first one way more, but I think the first time I watched it, I was like, this isn't the same thing as the second one. They're not... What's wrong with Rachel Weisz's eyebrows? What's going on there? She had normal eyebrows in the second one. Her eyebrows are so barely non-existent. They're so plucked to hell.
That's what we're worried about in The Mummy. Not eyebrows.
That was the style in the early 2000s. But yeah, and well, they weren't together, and that was one of the things that I really liked about it. And it's like, they hate each other. I don't like this.
That's the best part.
I know. I was a dumb kid. So, like, it's not anything new, but at the same time, it is interesting to see one of the masters be introducing children to this hyper violent stuff and just like dark and spooky imagery. And to the question that I asked, like the evolution of horror as a genre, as much as I will, talk about Scream a lot, and I probably will the entirety of this podcast forever, big Scream fan, even the Scream franchise at this point, like they can kind of comment on the horror genre as it currently exists, and they're going to make another one here soon. I liked the new redo well enough. Well, it's a continuation, but what do they call it? A requel in that movie. They can comment on it, but I don't think they'll ever be able to reinvent the genre like they did, because they completely reinvented the slasher genre, which was horrible by the time Scream rolled around, since the 80s, Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th. And even those movies eventually succumbed to that trashiness.
Yeah.
It just became trashy and nonsense, and there was no heart in it. It was just kill, 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 whatever random shtick we could have for our killer in any movie.
You lose the story.
You lose anything to latch onto. It's just
any sort of substance.
Yeah. But that's kind of what it became, in the late 80s, early 90s. And Scream came in and it was like, hey, you can actually be smart about it and make it scary and fun and whatever. And then we get, I Know What You Did Last Summer, and it kind of reinvented and created a bunch of copycats of that last successful thing. Like even Wes Craven, who reinvented the horror genre or the slasher genre, starts stumbling and making uninteresting horror movies like the Cursed movie. I mean, he's going for it.
God, that movie. Oh.
With
Christina
Ricci and young Jesse Eisenberg and Joshua Jackson, and a very hot early 2000s cast.
Who's that blonde?
Hot blonde. Judy Greer. She's in the newer Halloween movies.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, she's in it.
That movie definitely had a young hot cast for the time, and that was definitely a thing after Scream as well, because Scream was the same thing. Just pick a bunch of people who are on the teen shows, and like that's not a bad idea. You want to pick younger actors who can fit the roles of teenagers or whatever. They're playing teenagers on TV. They're all in their mid-20s. That's kind of the joke in Scream a little bit. As you've moved on to these days, you have your A24 movies, you have your Get Outs, you have your I completely skipped over the torture porn. Saw is definitely responsible for movies like Hatchet. It becomes all about it's a gory gore fest, and that's
hyper-violence.
That's what it's all about, and it's for the real kind of gore fans out in the, and like I appreciate some good gore, but I like it attached to something. It's got to be fun. If you're gonna do it, it's got to be fun. It's got to be like a Hatchet level thing where you're having fun.
What? Yeah.
You don't like Hatchet.
Not really, no. It's not.
Hatchet 1 and 2 are fine. You don't like the third one because Victor Crowley growls like a bear at one point, and they use a bear sound effect, and you're like,
weird.
And that's been your go-to for like ever since then. Because I remember when it came out, I was like, hey, the third Hatchet's out, and you're like, oh, cool. And we watched it, and at one point it's just like, and so like ever since
I was just
then,
like, wait, that threw me off.
Yeah.
Why are we a bear?
It's completely turned you off from the series ever since.
It's annoying that there's little things like that'll really just get under my skin so much that I can't look past it, and I really wish my brain didn't do it, but it just does, because I'm just like, but why? Why did you pick that sound effect?
Yeah.
What was the point? But I think a lot of the movies nowadays are going more towards the psychological, which I appreciate. I love gore. Again, I'm like you. I like a good gory movie. Obviously, it has to be attached to something, but some days I just want to watch just the nasty, disgusting movie, and I'm fine with that. Depends on the mood. But I prefer the psychological. I feel like that's far scarier.
I feel like we're in the era of, specifically with psychological horror, it's like the horrific. You know what I mean? It's like we're getting into like horrific ideas, and God, that's terrifying, and more so on a psychological level than a oh no boo scary guy in your face. And it's like sometimes it is that, but like with your Get Outs and your something like Annihilation, Us, yeah. Well, I mean, if you're just talking Jordan Peele.
Well, no,
I'm trying to think of more than just that. I mean, like a Nope looks really good.
Yeah.
But that's not out yet at this point. And, well, I was going to mention Annihilation. That movie isn't just like, scary thing. But it has some legitimate terrifying moments of just pure dread and horror.
Yeah.
And that movie has body horror. It has psychological horror. It has just visceral, this is terrifying and horrific. That's all I can really describe it. And
yeah.
Alex Garland has a new movie coming out, Men, which I want to see. I think that's also an A24 joint.
It is. Yeah.
So, I mean, they definitely have the handle on it currently, but like, where can it go from here? Is it going to stick around at this point? But, you have the Conjurings, the whole kind of popcorn horror movie genre.
I feel like popcorn horror is still going to be a thing.
For sure.
Like, I don't see that going anywhere.
But I mean, that's the style of it currently. It's not always been that style of like, look over here, no, look over here, and then bang, like right here is where the thing is. Like that's James Wan's style.
I'd like to see horror kind of stick with the cerebral horror, kind of making you think. For me, The Strangers never scared me. That movie doesn't scare me. Ideally, it should.
That's scary because it could happen. That's kind of the thing about that.
That's what I'm saying, as I understand, it should. I don't know why that doesn't scare me. Someone breaking into the house would freak me out. Yes, obviously. But that movie doesn't scare me. What scares me is like Us and all the weird shit that like A24 movies. There's a lot of A24 movies that I've seen that I'm just like, no thanks.
So more so being confronted with yourself more so than being confronted with strangers who want to kill you.
I guess.
Yeah.
Dealing with our inner demons is a lot scarier sometimes. Obviously, it's still scary to deal with people coming in and doing terrible things to you. I'm not saying that's not a thing. It just doesn't trigger me to being scared, which I wish it did, because it doesn't make sense why it doesn't. Maybe it's the way it was set up. I don't know, but it just didn't freak me out. But like Annihilation, like it's a lot of that fear of the unknown too. Like Annihilation is one of those movies that's just like, I barely understand what the fuck happened halfway through that movie, honestly.
It's definitely about mutation and cancer and sickness and fear of the unknown, and there's a lot of elements to it. that it's tackling.
But it's a lot of dealing with yourself and your own
For sure.
fears.
Looking
and a lot
inward,
of, and
yeah.
see, yeah, and that's freaky because sometimes you have to face your fears, and it's a lot harder to do than there's a hacker coming at me with the chainsaw. I can run from that, I guess. Sure, fine.
Versus, looking inward and discovering beauty and destruction and rebirth and everything else.
Yes.
And yeah.
It's terrifying.
Definitely.
You know what I mean?
No, I'm just talking
Yes.
about the differences between,
Yes,
and
there's differences.
the answer to the question, what's the next evolution of horror as a genre? Obviously, we don't know. If we knew, we'd be making that thing. But I think we're always going to have those elements. Some elements come out of style, some come back in style. We're always going to have the popcorn horror movies. We're always going to have the crappy slashers. But you're also going to have people looking to push the envelope with style and substance and creativity in regards to psychological and social meanings of things and trying to extrapolate. I mean, that's filmmaking in general, right? Just trying to extrapolate the human experience by pouring your own experiences into a film. And either that or you're pulling a monkey around on a skateboard. One of those two things are movies.
One of
And
those
that
two
is the future of horror movies. Welcome to my TED Talk. Thank you for listening.
things. I want to see the monkey on a skateboard.
I haven't seen a good monkey movie in a while. What happened to the monkey? Honestly, leave monkeys out of it. Just do CGI monkeys at this point. The monkeys don't deserve to be
real ones.
pulled around on a skateboard unless they want to, and they get a cut of the profits.
Yeah. Where is this going?
Nowhere. Liz, is
good.
I think that's the podcast. I think that's
it.
I think we learned something today. I think we have learned our very first letter. I didn't even know the alphabet before we started doing this podcast. So,
I just learned the alphabet last night, so
illiteracy is a hell of a drug.
we'll get there.
We're going to shoot for regularity with this podcast. I would like to shoot for bi-monthly to start, and we'll go from there. We appreciate your feedback, any you may have. You can always email us at abchorrorpod@gmail.com. That's abchorrorpod@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Dan's News. You can follow Liz on Twitter at
Lyra_VT.
And that's that. Hey, Liz, I love you. We said I love you at the same time.
Oh.
Were you talking to me or the audience?
Both.
Oh, I was just talking to you.
Oh, sorry.
I don't know these people. How'd you get in here?
Get out.
ABCs of Horror is a Dan's News production hosted by Daniel Gidlow and Liz Dixon. Voiceover by me, Max Gonzalez. Skeleton artwork by Dro the Artist. Please rate the show in-app and leave a review. Follow the podcast for updates on social media at ABC Horror Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Thank you for listening.